What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at the Premier League clash between Manchester City and Liverpool. With now 7 games remaining, City's 1 point ahead of Liverpool, and you have to say favorites to win the title, having that 1 point advantage. Now, before we get into the tactics behind the match, check out the OneFootball app. This video is being brought to you by them today. It's a great app. You see me scrolling through on the screen there. It's a free app. There's a download link in the description below, so be sure to check that out. You get all your things football, all the latest updates, news, transfers, and a great way to stay in touch with this title race between Manchester City and Liverpool, and perhaps the two best teams in the world right now, going head to head and playing again next week. So download the OneFootball app, and be sure to check out both my books in the description as well. They're on Amazon, and check out Keyframe. It's how I'm making this video. All in the description. Be sure to check that out, and let's get right into the tactics. Now, in the build-up from the goal kick, Manchester City only did this sparingly, with now a new trend from their side, with Bernardo Silva dropping deeper alongside Ederson, and this was then in pairing with Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne. Now in the second half, Liverpool also kept their emphasis on a midfielder jumping, and whether that was Jordan Henderson, Thiago, or if the responsibility fell on Jota, this would all be affected by the jumping of Bernardo Silva, because now the half space would then have to be covered by a midfielder jumping over a greater distance. So with the front three blocking the single pivot and the wide area of the fullbacks like Cancelo here, Bernardo Silva dropping deeper then extends the connection and the space around Kevin De Bruyne. So if City had a double pivot around Rodri in the center here, the response would be from Liverpool to have one of their eights jump to then close down and allow Jota to use his cover shadow against one of the double pivot, and have a player like Jordan Henderson jump and take care of the other using man orientation. But with Bernardo Silva playing a lot deeper, this then changed the way Liverpool had to press, and they had to do so in a way that didn't allow Kevin De Bruyne higher up the field to be able to get on the ball. Now, once we came out of the initial build-up, using the goalkeeper out of his own penalty area in the goal box, we start to see the main shape of Manchester City take place. And this saw wide fullback and a double pivot, which is a bit new shape for Manchester City and specifically designed to then progress past Liverpool's press. Liverpool, they maintain their same shape of a 4-3-3 with a large emphasis again on their eights being able to jump to the holding midfielders of Manchester City and block the half spaces using their cover shadows. But the key point was then Kevin De Bruyne and a narrow front three from City. So as we heard Pep Guardiola say, he did not use a false 9. He used a very narrow front three that tried to pin the back four to then create space around Kevin De Bruyne to operate between the lines and connect the attack and try and avoid the cover shadows of Liverpool through the half spaces. And then with the double pivot, we also saw more movement from Bernardo Silva dropping deeper to get the ball, and these two players actively involved in the rest defense, also controlling the central corridors to try and neutralize the threat of Liverpool in transition. Now, as we see Manchester City moving forward, maintain their back four and their wide fullbacks, which is something we don't often see from Manchester City. Phil Foden, Gabriel Jesus, and Sterling made up the front three that was very narrow and tried to look to target the space around Kevin De Bruyne and make a high volume of runs in behind. And with this narrow front three, we see the freedom for the fullbacks to go and get forward and occupy the wide areas, often leading to long diagonals, allowing them easy entry to the final third. Liverpool, as they dropped deeper, went with a 4-5-1, and the key aspect from this is because of the fullbacks going so high for Manchester City, oftentimes the responsibility would then be on the eights to go and jump and pressure the central defenders, which would then further emphasize the use of players like Thiago and Jordan Henderson's cover shadow to cover the space between the lines and provide adequate pressure on the ball so that John Stones or Laporte wouldn't be allowed free service in behind. Now we see just before Manchester City scored their third goal that was ruled for offsides and the match finished 2-2, we see the shape from Manchester City, their back four, Cancelo tucking in from his wide left back position because of the vertical nature of their play in this moment. So he tucks in to then try and create control over transition and a tighter offensive structure. Then we have the double pivot staggering themselves with Rodri coming deeper, and we see clearly the effect on Liverpool's shape this had. So with Mo Salah and Diego Jota higher up the field, we then can highlight Mane's shape going deeper to then track the run of Kyle Walker, which then has the responsibility of jumping to these deep lying playmakers on the midfielders, trying to block the half space and prevent Kevin De Bruyne from getting on the ball. Now, the reason why the central defender, Van Dijk, doesn't step and jump to then pressure De Bruyne between the lines is because of the narrow three players from Manchester City affecting the back line of Liverpool. And if these players jump and broke the back line, then there would be even more space in behind from an already high line that Manchester City were more than capable of playing direct, as we saw them play a bit more direct than they usually do. Now in build-up, Liverpool didn't do too much different, especially not in the first half. We see them using a 4-3-3 with a bit of asymmetry in their midfield and a front three, often allowing Salah to stay wide and Jota and Mane to invert. Jordan Henderson here in the midfield is the player higher up the field, then create wide rotations with Trent Alexander-Arnold and Mo Salah. Now for Manchester City, we go with their 4-4-2, but we see also the tendency for one of their holding midfielders, in this case Bernardo Silva, to jump to then create access to Fabinho, which forces their other two wide midfielders to stay a bit more narrow. Also, there was a heavy emphasis on the wide players for Manchester City to track and be oriented toward the fullbacks of Liverpool. So that's why we see Foden here going so deep, because Trent Alexander-Arnold was released in possession to occupy a higher position. Now we see in the midfield third, clear 4-4-2, with Mane making the run in behind and Salah wider on the opposite side. And with these two players occupying height and width, it allows for Jota to drop between the lines. And one thing that was improved in the second half is how Liverpool played in possession. Now with the wide rotations being a heavy part of the game, we saw positions of Thiago and Fabinho specifically take up better positions in the second half and be more structured in their approach, allowing them to also maintain more control when they were in possession of the ball. Now, one tendency was for Matip to jump a bit higher when he was in possession and dribble to then attract a Man City player. Now, this would cause a reaction from Thiago to stay deeper in the weak side half space as a deep line playmaker and give them a 1-3 rest defense to then prepare for a Manchester City transition, with De Bruyne and Jesus being the two players in the first line of pressure for Manchester City. Then we would then see a midfield four, which would often look like a midfield three because of the deep nature of the wide midfielders of Manchester City. And when Andy Robertson was released by the dropping of Thiago, this would then force either Raheem Sterling or the player caught on the wing to drop deeper and maintain a back five to then have better access to these wide areas and not get beat in behind. So from here, we then have our narrow front three with Trent Alexander-Arnold coming between the lines, overloading the right half space with Jordan Henderson, all positioned around the ball, overloading the space between the lines to try and free up Salah in the wide area and get him isolated in a one-on-one situation with Cancelo. But these positionings of Jordan Henderson and Trent Alexander-Arnold specifically suited their nature and their passing ability to try and lead to more passes in behind and more penetrating passes in the final third to create these dangerous chances, all starting from Matip in build-up, driving forward. Now the last picture here with Gabriel Jesus dropping in to create the back five for Manchester City, tracking the run of Andy Robertson as we saw in the last picture, and then the other three midfielders shifting across to the weak side with then Kevin De Bruyne and then Raheem Sterling just off our screen to the right as the first line of pressure, looking to have an effective rest offense shape. And then we see how narrow the front three from Liverpool can be, and the width being created by Robertson. Now, the game was a bit stretched in this moment, and this is one thing that Jurgen Klopp said they did much better in the second half, was having possession and how they played in possession of the ball because of the control they were able to have and the continuity they were able to create throughout their game. That's where we're going to wrap up the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.